Disney spent years telling us the sequel trilogy was the future of Star Wars. Rey, Kylo Ren, The First Order, Galaxy's Edge, Batuu. The whole carefully curated Disney Star Wars ecosystem. And now 3 weeks before The Mandalorian and Grogu hit theaters, suddenly Luke, Leia, Han, Vader, and Stormtroopers are back in the spotlight. That's not confidence. It's not listening to fans. That is Disney grabbing the original trilogy like a life vest while Baby Yoda tries to drag a Disney Plus show across the theatrical finish line. And the funniest part? Even after Disney reportedly made this the cheapest live-action Star Wars movie they've ever produced, the math still looks ugly. Because the trades aren't comparing it to The Force Awakens. They're not comparing it to Rogue One. They're comparing it to Solo. Yeah, Solo. I mean, that's not a hype cycle. That's a warning label with ears. So today we're talking about how Disney may have just buried its own sequel trilogy to save The Mandalorian and Grogu, and the receipts aren't using the Force. They're using basic math. Welcome back to The Critical Nerd, where we keep our expectations low and our receipts high. If you're new here, this channel covers movies, streaming, box office, franchises, and the corporate nonsense behind all of it. So do me a favor if you would, smash that like button, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Now, I already covered how Mando and Grogu forecast exposed Disney's bigger Star Wars problem. But now Disney's own behavior is proving the point. This isn't just about a tracking number anymore. No. It's about a company that spent a decade building a sequel-era foundation and is now visibly running away from it 3 weeks before the most important Star Wars release in 7 years. So let's break it down. Let's start with the receipts, shall we? Deadline reports Mando and Grogu is currently tracking around $80 million plus over the 4-day Memorial Day weekend. The Hollywood Reporter has the same number. I wonder why that is. Could it be because they're owned by the same company? Possibly. Box Office Pro just bumped their projection up to 90 to 100 million for the 3-day after Disney's late marketing push kicked in. Sounds fine in a vacuum. It's not fine in context. The reported production budget for this thing is somewhere in the $166 million range. It's actually 166.4 that's being reported, but who's counting, that 0.4? For a normal movie, that's insane. For Disney Star Wars, that's basically the clearance rack. This is reportedly the cheapest live-action Star Wars Disney has ever made. Which actually, it should tell you something. Disney knew they needed to lower the bar. They knew the days of automatically printing $1 billion with the Star Wars logo were over. So instead of a $250 million Death Star-sized budget, they made the responsible version, a leaner Star Wars, a safer bet, a movie built around Grogu, the one Disney-era Star Wars character who could probably sell plush toys during a congressional hearing. But even with the lower budget, the math still has to work. Add roughly $100 million in marketing for a Memorial Day tentpole, apply the standard 2.5 times rule for theater splits and break even, you're looking at somewhere around $415 million worldwide just to feel safe. And here's the uncomfortable part. Solo, a Star Wars story, the embarrassing family photo Disney keeps face down in the drawer, finished its lifetime worldwide gross at $392 million. Let me repeat that again. To break even, this movie needs to outgross every cent Solo ever made worldwide over its entire theatrical run. That's hilarious in the darkest possible way because Disney spent years pretending Solo never happened. And now their big theatrical comeback is standing next to it in the box office lineup like, hey, buddy, you got room on that failure bench? Now, to be fair, tracking is not destiny. Movies overperform. Movies underperform. Movies catch fire. But when the first Star Wars in 7 years is being measured against Solo before it even opens, that's not where Disney wanted this conversation to be. This was supposed to be Star Wars returning to theaters as an event. Instead, it's becoming a math test. And Disney Star Wars hasn't exactly been honor roll material lately. Here's the bigger issue, though. Disney's trying to sell Mando and Grogu as a theatrical event, but Disney trained the audience to see this entire world as Disney Plus content. That's the trap they built for themselves. For 5 years, Mando was the streaming show. Baby Yoda was the streaming mascot. The Mandoverse was the Disney Plus corner of Star Wars. You watched it at home on the couch while folding laundry. Maybe while wondering why Book of Boba Fett suddenly turned into Mandalorian Season 2.5. And now Disney is saying, no. This isn't a streaming episode. This is cinema. Okay, but audiences aren't stupid. You can't spend 5 years conditioning people to treat something like subscription content, then suddenly charge them theater prices and act shocked when they hesitate. That's like Applebee's putting one mozzarella stick on a silver platter and calling it fine dining. I'm still eating it, but I know what this is. And that's the problem with Mando and Grogu. Disney needs this to feel like a movie. The brand history makes it feel like an upgraded Disney Plus finale, especially after Rise of Skywalker left the franchise looking like it got edited in a panic room. And if you want proof Disney knows the audience is reading this gap, look at the trades. The press is already pre-writing this is fine for what it is cope. Before opening weekend, before reviews, before the Thursday previews even drop. That's not a launch campaign. That's a soft landing. Now let's talk about the real tell, Galaxy's Edge. Because this is where Disney may have accidentally said the quiet part out loud. Galaxy's Edge was built around the sequel era, not the original trilogy, not the prequels, the sequels. The land was designed around Batuu, the Resistance, the First Order, Kylo Ren, Rey, and the Disney-era Star Wars mythology. That was the bet. That was Disney saying, this is our Star Wars now. And the fans looked at that and said, that's just so adorable. Where's Darth Vader? For years, Disney resisted fully embracing the original trilogy inside Galaxy's Edge because the land had to fit the timeline. It had to be canon. It had to be set in the sequel era because nothing says theme park fun like needing a Wikipedia entry before buying blue milk. But on April the 29th, 3 weeks and change before Mando and Grogu opens, Disney rolled Luke, Han, and Leia, Vader, and Imperial Stormtroopers right into Galaxy's Edge. They swapped the sequel-era John Williams cues for the classic original trilogy themes. They rebranded First Order Cargo into a military salvage shop. And per StarWars.com, they officially removed Galaxy's Edge from canon. That's not a small move. Disney spent years pitching this land as canon, set between The Last Jedi and Rise of Resistance. Reportedly billions of dollars built around that pitch. And right before their first theatrical Star Wars in 7 years, they ate the sequels out of their own theme park and dropped Vader instead. Now, some people are framing this as Disney finally listening to fans. Fine, the fan reaction has been positive. I'm not going to lecture anybody for liking Han Solo back at Galaxy's Edge. But I think it's more revealing than listening. This isn't Disney listening. This is Disney conceding. There's a difference. Listening is when you respect the audience before the damage is done. Conceding is when the numbers get scary and suddenly Darth Vader gets a day pass. If your new Star Wars movie needs the old Star Wars characters to make people care, that's not synergy. That's a distress flare with a John Williams score. And here's the receipt that proves it all. Geeks and Gamers ran a piece this past week with footage from Hollywood studios in Orlando. 3 weeks out from Mando and Grogu, Galaxy's Edge, empty around the Mandalorian character. No line, no handler. Meanwhile, out on the West Coast in Anaheim, the original trilogy meet and greets are at capacity. Same brand, same weekend. The character with the movie opening is in 18 days is the one nobody's lining up for. When the park built around the Mandalorian can't draw a line for the Mandalorian 3 weeks before the Mandalorian movie, that tells you the same thing the tracking numbers are telling you. Now let's talk about what this actually is. Fans have been joking about sequel erasure for years. Every time Disney downplays Rey or Kylo or the First Order, people say, look, they're pretending those movies didn't happen. I get the joke, but this isn't full erasure. It's worse. It's triage. Disney isn't deleting the sequels. They're just quietly moving them away from the front window, like a restaurant hiding the health inspection grade behind a plant. The sequel trilogy still exists. The Rey movie is allegedly still somewhere in development. The merchandise still pops up. The branding still floats around. But when Disney needs excitement, when Disney needs a crowd, when Disney needs Star Wars to feel big again, they don't reach for the sequel trilogy. They reach for the original trilogy every single time. And that tells you everything, because nostalgia isn't the problem. Bad nostalgia is the problem. Audiences aren't tired of old characters. They're tired of being sold damaged brands and then lectured when they don't clap. If the sequel trilogy had created lasting trust, Disney wouldn't need to keep dragging Luke and Vader out like franchise defibrillators. Clear, still dead, bring in Han. Clear, still dead, put Grogu in the cockpit. Then there's Gina Carano, and this matters because, but it shouldn't take over the story. The Hollywood Reporter ran a feature on April the 30th, a full sit-down with Carano ahead of her MMA return fight against Ronda Rousey. And the Star Wars portion of that interview is doing exactly what Disney didn't want it to do. Carano confirmed she had a Zoom call with Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni back in January. Praised them. Said they were never the bad guys to her. Said she hopes Mando and Grogu does well, and I'm quoting because Jon Favreau directed it, and he's a good man. Okay, that's a pretty graceful answer. That's the part Disney wanted to print. But she also said this, and I'm quoting again, "Me and Pedro don't keep in touch. Last conversation? Carl Weathers' funeral, February of 2024. 2 years of silence between the two leads of the show this movie is built on. Just take a step back. Why is Disney working a back channel with Carano in January if they don't need her? They needed her. They needed a reconciliation moment. They needed a Cara Dune Returns headline to hand the press machine for Memorial Day. And they didn't get it. What they got instead is Carano taking the high road in the biggest trade in Hollywood, while every Pedro Pascal interview from now until May 22nd has the potential to turn in, "So Pedro, about Gina Carano." That's exactly the kind of distraction Disney does not need when the movie's already dealing with tracking questions. For a franchise that has spent years splitting its own audience into camps. The Cara Dune wound never closed. Disney needed clean hype. Instead, right before release, the wound is right back in front of the camera. And this is the main point. Disney's biggest issue isn't one tracking number. It's not one YouTube video. It's not one theme park update. It's not one Gina Carano quote. The issue is that all these things are pointing in the same direction. Disney isn't acting like Mando and Grogu is an unstoppable Star Wars event. They're acting like it needs help. Original trilogy help. Theme park help. Goodwill repair help. Nostalgia help. And probably a few emergency meetings where someone named Brad says, "What if we put Vader in the marketing?" Because the truth is, Mando isn't where he was in 2019. Back then, The Mandalorian felt like the first Disney Star Wars thing in years that people could mostly agree on. It was simple. It was cool. It had a silent bounty hunter and a tiny green money printer. Then Disney did what Disney does. They expanded it. They tangled it with other shows. They used it to prop up weaker projects. They brought Grogu back immediately after an emotional goodbye because apparently character development is nice. But plush sales, well, they're nicer. And now they want the audience to show up like this is a major cinematic event. The excitement feels softer, the trust is weaker, and the receipts are louder. That's why the original trilogy pivot matters. Disney is essentially admitting that Mando and Grogu by themselves may not generate the kind of theatrical moments Star Wars used to manufacture automatically. And that there is the scariest part for Lucasfilm. If Baby Yoda can't guarantee a Star Wars comeback, what can? So when people say Disney is finally listening to fans, I understand the optimism, I really do. I would love for Disney to learn the right lesson. But I don't think that's what this is. Disney is reading the room because the room stopped buying tickets. That's different. They didn't bring back the original trilogy energy because they had a spiritual awakening. They brought it back because the sequel trilogy didn't create enough long-term audience trust. They brought it back because Galaxy's Edge needed an actual shot of actual Star Wars iconography. They brought it back because Mando and Grogu needs to feel bigger than a Disney Plus continuation. And they brought it back because the box office math isn't giving them room to be arrogant. That's the part Disney keeps forgetting. Audiences don't owe franchises automatic loyalty. Star Wars used to be special because it felt like an event. Now Disney has to convince people it's still worth leaving the house for. And that's a much harder sell when the audience has years of the receipts. So here's where I land in all this. Mando and Grogu can still open fine. It could overperform. Grogu could do what Grogu does and sell tickets, toys, popcorn buckets, sippy cups, tax software, whatever Disney slaps on his face. It might absolutely clear $100 million domestically on the back of Memorial Day weekend with no major competition. But the bar Disney needs to clear isn't $100 million. The bar is, this proves Star Wars is back as a theatrical brand. And here's the line that should be hanging over this whole release. The problem isn't that 80 million is automatically a flop. The problem is that this is Star Wars, returning to theaters after 7 years, with Baby Yoda in the passenger seat, and the industry is already reaching for the Solo comparison. That's not hype. That's a warning label. Disney didn't bury the sequel trilogy because they wanted to. They buried it because the receipts forced them to. And even with Luke, Leia, Han, Vader, and Baby Yoda all thrown in the nostalgia blender, the question remains, will audiences automatically show up? Or will they actually show up? Or is this just Disney learning, again, that you can't rebuild trust with the theme park patch and a plush toy? Drop your prediction in the comments. Where does Mando and Grogu actually land? Solo numbers? Lilo and Stitch numbers? Somewhere in the middle? And if it does come in closer to Solo than Disney wants, what happens to Star Wars on the big screen after that? So if you enjoyed this video, do me a favor, hit like, subscribe, ring the notification bell. And around here, yeah, we keep our expectations low and our receipts high. I'm the Critical Nerd. I'm out.